My name is Mohammed Butt. This is my second YouTube IOC. I'm going to be doing 1914 by Wilfred Owen. So in 1914, Wilfred tries to tell us that war is just a stage, and after war, that there will be peace. And he uses three poetic devices, which is metaphor, personification, and a shift in tense, in order to convey his message. So in stanza one, we see metaphors such as he refers to the war as winter, a foul tornado, how the tornado it whirled, uh, verse whales and famines. These are all metaphors for the different natural disasters that can happen in war, which gives war a very negative connotation. But then, as all storms are, they all have endings, and afterwards, things do get better. So the second one is personification. He says spring blooms. Spring, the season cannot actually bloom itself, but then he refers to the flowers that are blooming in spring, and this gives uh, a positive connotation to spring as the season, and he refers to early Greece, so he refers to uh, the different masterpieces that were created in the ancient Greece. And afterwards, he says how summer blazed her glory out. He's giving also a positive connotation to uh, the summer, and he's comparing it as uh, like a season. Summer is summer like the time period, and then afterwards he mentions autumn softly fell. Uh, when a season's like when something softly falls, it's very gentle, and then he afterwards he mentions a harvest home. So then he gives autumn a very positive connotation. He gives spring, summer, autumn, all these positive connotations, and then he mentions in contrast to all these the seasons how now for us wild winter, which is like wild winter, he says it as if it's a negative connotation. And then the last device is tense. In the in the first stanza, he uses a present tense, and this is shown in with perishing great darkness closes in. He didn't say closed in; he says closes in. So it tells you it's happening right now. Uh, rending the sails of progress. It's not rended the sails of progress, but that and then afterwards he contrasts that after the volta, which is the beginning of the second stanza, that for after spring had bloomed in early Greece. So immediately is showing that a shift in the tone, or sorry, shift in the tense, and this shows us that this also shows a shift in the tone as well, because in the first stanza, it mentions all these negative diction, darkness, foul tornado, uh, rending the sails, famines, mentions all these negative things. And then the second stanza, it's more of a nostalgic tone. It's talking about the past rather than what's happening in the present. And he mentions like all the seasons and how they all had positive connotations. And then uh, the structure of the poem is uh, this is an Italian sonnet, which it consists of an octet and then a sestet. The octet has a very negative connotation about the war. It's saying how it hurt the art, how there's famines of thought and feeling, and how love's wine is thin. And then the sestet, in the first four lines of the sestet, it's very nostalgic. It starts analyzing the situation as does Italian sonnet does. But then the last two lines of the sestet, it goes back to the uh, basically the matter at hand, that right now we're at war right now, and we're trying to create a new spring, which means afterwards we're going to make a new peace. And blood for seed is a metaphor for like the soldiers lives. After we plant the soldiers lives down, after we use it up, we're going to create a new life, and this is an example of a metaphor. And we see a parallel between this poem and the artillery sonnet. Artillery sonnet also it has the first octet mentioning a violent situation, and then afterwards it starts talking like analyzing the situation, kind of removes itself from what's happening in the first four lines of the sestet, and then the last two lines it gets back to the matter at hand, and Owen really puts his thinking, like he mentions what he's actually thinking, which is that we need a new age of glory, or like we need a new age of peace, and for that we're gonna use blood, the blood of men, for growing this new thing. This poem is in iambic pentameter, and which has and then in the first line of the first stanza, it starts off with a trochee, with a spondee, and this is it breaks the rhythm on the spot, and it gives basically like a dramatic entrance to the poem, how war broke, emphasizing the suddenness of how the war, like it caught everyone by surprise. And the second four lines of the first stanza, it talks about how the war is ruining artistic work, and basically how people are uh, they're they're not talking about their inner like emotions anymore. They're talking about what's like they're talking about basically war, such as from the words verse wails, which means that the poetry is now it's like it's wailing basically. It's very it's calling out. It's like a negative connotation. That war is very impactful on art, and also there's more evidence of this from the second last line of the first stanza, which says famines of thought and feeling, and we established that famines is uh, it means a lack of food, um, and this is a metaphor for how there's no more thought and emotion, and it's all basically like all what they're doing now is violence. And love's wine is thin. Um, like love is supposed to be like a romantic thing, and uh, wine is associated with love. And when the wine grows thin, it means it's not a good quality anymore. But overall, this poem it mentions how there is the extended metaphor of the poem is that how war is like seasons, and how war is like a storm. It's very violent, but as does any storm, it will all come to pass. And there's also uh, what's it called? There's also sound devices which Wilfred Owen uses in the poems. In the first line, "Winter of the world," it sounds as if wind is blowing. This adds the uh, to the dark tone of the initial stanza, and the type of diction he uses in the first stanza is, as I mentioned before, is very negative. There is more uh, sound devices in the poem, such as verse wails, which breaks the iambic pentameter. It breaks the iambic pentameter 4, and basically the ruins the pattern and draws emphasis to it. And this is an example of a spondee, which is a double stressed word. Um, Wilfred Owen uses examples of previous nations such as Greece, but because Greece it had artistic masterpieces. Rome also it was like it was seen as like the pinnacle of a civilization, and how Ottoman softly fell because there was no really like great civilization um, after Rome. But then it's saying that how like slowly civilization started to become more, and then a slow grand age, which is uh, which means that people were getting wealthier, people were getting better. But as of right now, there is um, the wild winter, Again, you hear the W like repeating W, which it sounds like the wind, like the wild winter, and in need of sowing for a new spring. New spring. This is referring to the new piece that will be that Wilfred Owen expects.